Turn to Galatians chapter 4, because I love this passage because it reminds us of the way God had arranged the world. It really comes down to the way God had arranged the world in the first century. Now, that doesn't, before I answer this question the way I want to answer, let me just say that clearly there were those in the New Testament era who, in the age of the apostles, who were given the capacity to speak languages they had not studied. You see that on the day of Pentecost. Each man heard them in their own dialect, it says. So clearly that was a miraculous gift given in the time of the apostles. But really the answer to your question isn't that. It's broader than that. And here in Galatians chapter 4, verse 4, I love this verse. I quoted it this morning. But when the fullness of the time came, when the fullness of the time came, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law. Now, there are a lot of things that means when the fullness of the time came. But what it certainly means is the way God had ordered and structured the first century world. I mean, think about what God had done across the nations of the Mediterranean to ensure the spread of the gospel. First of all, you had the Romans. You have, Augustus, Caesar Augustus, who comes on the scene, establishes the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. And so you have across the entire Mediterranean world, you have one power. So you don't have all of the boundaries like you have even today, but instead you had one large empire, and it was open doors for those who lived there because of that reality. In addition to that, because of the power of Rome, militarily, they had established peace in that part of the world. So no one was challenging them in the first century, the time of Christ, the time of the apostles and the early church. So you had the sort of political scene was exactly right for the coming of the gospel, because now you have roads. The Romans, not only did they break down those borders, but they built roads. I mean, I think you understand this, but our culture is so Roman. You understand that there were multi-level malls in first century Rome? You understand that many of the public works that we have came out of Rome, that roads and the sort of highways that cross national boundaries all came out of Rome. It made it easy for Paul and those who traveled with him to go from one place to another because of the Pax Romana, because of the Roman control of the Mediterranean world. So that's one part of it. But now to your question specifically. Alongside of that, you had the Greek language. You have to go back, obviously, before the time of Christ, when the Greeks were really in power, the time of Alexander, you remember, in the 300s, when 300s BC, when Alexander the Great spread the Greek culture and the Greek language around the world. And he conquered it seemed in a day. That's why he's pictured in Daniel as an animal that has lightning speed, because that's exactly what Alexander did. Well, not only did he conquer, but everywhere he went, he took the Greek culture and the Greek language. And so wherever you went in the area where Alexander conquered there in the Mediterranean world, and it spread all over that area of the world, you had the Greek language. So you have the Greek language, the Romans come in, and of course they speak Latin, many of them, but guess what? Greek became the market language of the first century. Greek was to the first century what English is to the modern world. You go almost anywhere in the world and you'll find a lot of English speakers, or you'll find at least people who've been educated to some extent so that they can communicate with others who speak it. It is the market language. The same thing was true with Greek in the first century. How did that happen? Well, it happened because Alexander conquered the world and then died young. It happened because overlaid with Alexander's conquering the world, you had Caesar Augustus, and you had the Pax Romana. It was the perfect environment for Christ to come and for the gospel to spread, because now you had a common language. So the New Testament is written in what's called Koine Greek. The word koinos means common. It simply means this is the common kind of Greek. If you go back to before Christ, you had classical Greek, which is a more polished, formal Greek. But it became so common in the ancient world that the average person spoke it. And so you had this, what was called Common Greek or Koine Greek. That's what the New Testament is written in. It's written in the market language, the English, if you will, of the first century. And that's why Paul could go so many places. And those who were educated had been educated in the market language. They'd been educated in all things Greek, because that was the culture that had been exported by Alexander the Great. Even though the Romans were in charge, the Greeks ruled the culture. And so, because of that, back to our verse, when the fullness of the time came, let me interpret that a little differently for you. When God had arranged everything perfectly, he sent his son. That included politically and it included linguistically. So you have a common language spoken across this one empire where people could communicate freely, and particularly the educated masses.